Hello everyone, welcome to Soapbox Theology. This is Pastor Gabe. Again, we're continuing our trek through the book of James, and we're in chapter 1 still. Today we're going to be looking at verses 9 through 11, going through this verse by verse. And this is always a good thing to do. This is called exegetical preaching, exegetical looking at the text, letting the text tell you what it says. And one of the reasons it's good to go through it verse by verse is you're able to read it in context. It's so easy to just take a verse and to separate it from its context, put it on a refrigerator and kind of just let it speak to you, but it kind of speaks to you in its own, and we tend to apply it in any which way we can instead of understanding that it has a context, and sometimes it may not actually be speaking what it is we think we're speaking. And so it's always good to go through a book verse by verse, because then you have the context of what went before, what comes next. It helps you with interpretation. So having said that, the context again is James writing to brothers and sisters who are dispersed around the Roman Empire, and they've been suffering persecution. Like I've said before, some saints have already been martyred, people have been put to death, are being persecuted, running from one city to another, trying to avoid this sort of persecution. And James is writing to encourage them because they need encouragement. This is like, we go to churches and some people think, why if I can just get the pastor to pray for me, or if the elders can pray for me, or so-and-so would pray for me, and if they would knew what I was going through, then I would find help. And the truth is, you need to just go to God. But it's always good to hear from an experienced apostle what to do in suffering, what to do in pain. So he's writing to encourage them. So in verse 9, we'll read it first. Let the lowly brother boast in his exaltation, and the rich in his humiliation, because like a flower of the grass, he will pass away. For the sun rises with its scorching heat and withers the grass, its flower falls and its beauty perishes, so also will the rich man fade away in the midst of his pursuits. So what? Why are we talking about this all of a sudden? See, part of the assumption was in the first century, and this is actually through the Bible, is that rich people to a certain degree were being blessed and honored and focused upon by God, and other people who were suffering and struggling was because God was somehow punishing them. This is actually not at all the case, but it's a tendency that we have. It's a way that we view the world. And in fact, this carries over a little bit. We see this kind of view turned on its head with Job. He was very rich, he was very blessed from God, and it didn't mean that he had all of that because God gave it to him because he loved him more, and that's why he was in that state. If you recall, there's a story in the New Testament where Jesus says it's harder for a rich man to get into the kingdom of heaven than for a camel to go through the eye of the needle. And the disciples are all shocked, what? Then who then can be saved? And we hear that and we kind of think that's a weird thing to say. But their thinking is, if these people are clearly blessed from God, again, because they're wealthy and they're doing well, and if these people are clearly blessed from God and it's hard for them to get in, then it's got to be impossible for the rest of us, because the rest of us are just in dire straits, right? We're suffering. It's awful. God clearly is not looking on us in favor. So what hope is there for us? The Word of God is always turning this principle on its head, because again, part of the theme of this book and the theme of suffering is looking out around us circumstantially. If things are going bad, then things must be bad, and I'm kind of in trouble. But if things are going good, then I'm good and I'm happy, and God loves me. And it's that's not the way that we live our lives, or we're supposed to, that we're called to view the world. And so this is saying, kind of like in the beginning, if you're he's using more examples here. In the beginning, if you're going in suffering, look for a way to count it as joy, because you can learn, right? You can grow. It doesn't have to be the end of the world. In this same way, let the lowly brother boast, right, in his exaltation. The poor and the lowly are not exalted. That's the point. You can look for ways that you can be brought up when you're in that state. When you're in that state, look for ways to bring you up. Look for things that could be changed. Look, it's another way to kind of find the hope, find the silver lining, so to speak. But let the lowly brother boast in his position. Why? Because it's so easy and natural to curse your position, to curse your dire straits, to curse and you just kind of get stuck down there. And then the same thing, the rich in his humiliation. Okay, again, we're talking to those that are being persecuted. The rich also needs to understand that in their humiliation, if they're suffering in the same way, there is something to be gained from them. Neither are they supposed to look at their situation and think, oh, well, God must be turning on me now because everything has kind of stopped working out in my favor. There's that, and then there's also the aspect of that the rich needs to be reminded that it is not their money that puts them in a position to be above and beyond persecution. Again, that is not where you're supposed to be putting your trust in. And so it goes on to describe, because like a flower of the grass, he will pass away. The rich man's going to die just like the poor man. Sometimes it might make suffering easier if you have resources, but if you're suffering for your faith, chances are it's not going to matter a whole lot, because it's a whole different level of persecution. It's spiritual, it's emotional, it affects your community. But these things, there's a way in which kind of suffering brings everyone down kind of the same level, especially if it's for the Lord, because you have that standard where you're walking in faith, you're trusting in God, and you're not looking to the externals. But it's always a temptation to look to the externals, especially to those with minimal resources and those with great resources. It's really easy to interpret things that way. For the sun rises with its scorching heat and withers the grass. Its flower falls and the beauty perishes. So also will the rich man fade away in the midst of his pursuits. So this is a reminder, okay? It's very easy for us to think that someone in a rich or with greater possessions is going to do better. It might actually be that they're going to do just as bad, if not worse. I heard a commentator once said, the more that we love this world and the things of this world is the more that we're going to suffer. And the less that we love the things of this world, the least we will suffer. Why? Because I'm not relying on the things of this world for comfort, for security, for safety. But if I am, man, when the foundations get shaken, I have that much more to lose. I have that much more to mourn. I have that much more to weep over. I have that much more to lose, to become destabilized over. And so I think there's a couple things going on here. It's telling both the poor and the rich not to take security in their position. It's calling them both to look for ways that they can grow in these situations by looking at, how can the rich man learn in his humility? How can the how can the lowly brother in his exaltation? How can they look for ways to glory in these things? But there's kind of a special reminder here because of the rich. The rich will fade away in his pursuits. He may not realize his fortune. He may not realize those goals. And especially for the rich saint, those kinds of goals might be cut short. Those kinds of endeavors might come to an end. And all people might be reduced to zero. Suffering, both rich and poor can lose someone. Both rich and poor have probably lost people in COVID. But where is our hope? Where are we truly trusting in God? And this is probably a good reminder for Americans because, it's easy for us to think we're not rich, but we're rich. We're compared to the world, we're all rich. We are all rich. We are all doing very, very well. We have lots of resources out in the West, especially in America. And it's easy because it's easy for us because we can always look at someone who's richer, right? Bill Gates is richer. And these kinds of people, they have more resources, and so we don't think of ourselves as rich, but we're very, very, very blessed. And the challenge for us is we are so blessed, but because we are aware of so many other people that are doing better than us, that are more rich, is we don't realize it. And so we're almost in the worst position. and that we have so many resources that we trust in, but we don't understand it. So there can kind of be a blindness here, and that we don't understand how well we have it. But in suffering, the rich can find a humiliation and grow, and the lowly can find an exaltation. They can find something. They can find something to rely on instead of just their positions, and instead of just defining their safety and security by those circumstances. We can look to God. So, just another reminder here of a way that we can find wisdom. I think this is an example of ways that we can, again, understand that when we're going through trial or tribulation, there are tests. For some of us, that test might just be material possessions, material wealth, those sorts of things. Can I get by? Can I continue to serve the Lord with less resources? Can I continue to, because again, for those of us who have so much, we don't consider really how much that is until it's gone. And if we're interpreting that sort of thing as God's favor, God's blessing, God's care, God's love, we have further to fall. And so it's a good reminder for you and I to not love the things of this world. As we're told in John, do not love the things of this world, right? Do not love the things of this world. It's a snare. We are instead to love the Lord in the ways of God. So it's just kind of a gentle reminder, perhaps might even speak more to us in the West, but we all have the ability to suffer, and we all fall into the trap of the things that we own, and we all fall into the trap of defining reality and life, and maybe even our relationship with God based on how well we're doing. And we ought not to do that. For some of us, this is a much bigger lesson to learn than for others, but God is not cursing or blessing or rescuing us based on our material wealth, possessions, or any of those things. God is looking at us, desiring us to look at Him in eyes of faith and trust. And He allows some to be rich and allows some to be poor, and those kinds of fights that are increasingly rearing their ugly heads in America and out in the West are just from the pit. God gives some people 10 talents, some people 5 talents, some people 1 talent. And in the end, when he comes back through him at the end of that parable, He doesn't have anything bad to say against the one who was given 10. He only has a problem with the one who did nothing with what they had. The Bible is not about scrubbing out all inequality. It's always looking to each and every single one of us in our position as where we are. And what are we doing? Are we being faithful where we are? That's the question. Suffering or not, are we being faithful with what we have? Are we doing something with what He has given? And that's the question. So consider that. This is James number 3, as we're going through this book. Thank you guys so much. Bye.